This was the most pivotal battle in the rise of the Han Dynasty. Before this moment, the Chu army, led by the overlord Xiang Yu, had been invincible. After this, the elite forces of Chu were annihilated, and any hope of a comeback was forever lost. This engagement also marks the earliest recorded large-scale clash of heavy cavalry in Chinese military history. The victor delivered a masterclass in the Chinese art of war, perfectly demonstrating the ultimate manipulation of both terrain and human psychology. It was a battle that altered the course of history, and a battle that wrote a true military miracle. This is Xiangzhou, in the modern Chinese province of Shandong. The Wei River, originating in the southern mountains, flows north through this land on its way to the Bohai Sea, cutting across the Great East-West Road. Let us turn back the clock 2,200 years to the winter of 204 BC. At this time, the Wei River was not constrained by the man-made dikes and farmlands of today. It was a classic wandering river. Its riverbed, hundreds of meters wide, was broad, shallow, and dotted with sandbars. During the dry winter season, one could even cross it on foot with care. On a day in November, after the first winter snow, two massive armies marched towards each other on the plains flanking the Wei River. On the eastern bank were the allied forces of the states of Chu and Qi. This Chu-Qi army was overwhelmingly dominated by the forces of Chu, sent north by the overlord Xiang Yu to rescue Qi. The nominal commander was Xiang Yu's nephew, but the true military authority rested unquestionably in the hands of the famed Chu general, Long Zhu. This grand army was said to number 200,000, though its actual strength was likely around 100,000. It was almost the last mobile grand army that the war-torn state of Chu could muster. In addition to vast numbers of phalanx infantry with long spears and skirmishers with short blades and shields, its most important component was the overlord's elite unit, the Chu heavy cavalry, Lufan cavalry. Their ranks must have numbered no less than 10,000. The Chu army also boasted a large number of war chariots, elite Yue cavalry, and their first to ascend and breach the lines, shock troops. It is safe to say that, aside from Xiang Yu himself, who was tied down on the front lines at Xingyang, the very essence of Chu's military might was concentrated here. In addition to the Chu forces, the king of Qi brought tens of thousands of his own infantry, bringing the combined true strength of the army to nearly 150,000. And on the western bank of the Wei River was the Grand Army led by Han Xin, Grand Marshal, Left Chancellor of the Han State, and Chancellor of the State of Zhao. The army on the west bank looked like a motley collection of patchwork troops. The red banners belonged to the Han army. They were not the most numerous, but they were either veterans who had followed Han Xin for over a year, or elites specifically dispatched by Liu Bang from the Qingyang front. The other banners, green, white, belonged to the surrendered armies of Zhao, Wei, and Dai that Han Xin had absorbed along his campaign. There were even soldiers in the yellow uniforms of Qi, identical to the army across the river. They were the Qi soldiers who had surrendered after the Battle of Lixia just over 20 days ago, led by 3 turncoat Qi generals. They had only had time to swap their banners for the red flags of Han. The Chu commander, Long Zhu, stood on his high command chariot, gazing at the colorful rabble across the river, a cold smile playing on his lips. He turned to the king of Qi and said, "Look at that army. Their banners are a mess, which means their discipline is in chaos. How can they be our match? I told you Han Xin is an easy opponent." Long Zhu was, without a doubt, a great general of Chu. From the very beginning, he had been one of the most accomplished commanders in the army, his achievements surpassing even his famous contemporaries. When the king of Zhujiang, Yingbu, rebelled, it was Long Zhu whom Xiang Yu entrusted to crush the uprising. In just a few months, he defeated the once feared Yingbu, forcing him to flee, and pacified the entire region. This time, Han Xin, against all expectations, had swept across the entire north of China in just over a year. Only the state of Qi remained unconquered. If Chu did nothing, the Han army would complete a grand strategic encirclement from the north. Thus, even though Xiang Yu could not leave the front lines, he scraped together an army of 200,000 and gave his most elite cavalry to his great general, Long Zhu. Long Zhu was keenly aware of the weight of his responsibility, but he was also a man of immense pride who held Han Xin in low regard. According to historical records, shortly after he entered the borders of Qi, an advisor proposed a cautious strategy to fortify the walls and clear the fields, forcing the Han army, which had traveled from afar, into a war of attrition they could not sustain. Long Zhu was utterly dismissive. "I have always known the measure of Han Xin," he scoffed. "He is easy to deal with. There is no need for us to fear him. Besides," he reasoned, "if I come to rescue Qi but simply allow the Qi people to achieve victory for themselves, what merit is there for me? But if I defeat Han Xin in battle now, I can claim half of the land of Qi. How could I possibly stop now?" It is a historical fact that Han Xin and Long Zhu once served together in the Chu army. The difference was that while Long Zhu was already a trusted top general, Han Xin was merely an ordinary Langzhong, palace attendant. In this regard, Long Zhu certainly possessed the capital to look down upon Han Xin. Yet once the battle lines are drawn, we have no reason to believe that such arrogance would be the normal reaction of a seasoned commander facing a renowned adversary who had conquered 4 states in a single year. A more plausible explanation is this. Long Zhu knew perfectly well that the 200,000-strong army under his command represented the very last ounce of Chu's strength. If he could not achieve a swift victory, faced with Liu Bang on the Xinjiang front and Peng Yue in the Liang region, the entire Chu position might collapse. Long Zhu had no time to fortify the walls and clear the fields to fight a war of attrition against Han Xin. This was, in fact, the dilemma facing all enemies of the Han army during the Chu-Han Contention. Unlike the Han faction, which possessed the natural fortress of Guanzhong and the fertile lands of Ba and Shu, their opponents had neither a secure rear nor the luxury of time. Therefore, we have sufficient reason to believe that while Long Zhu might have harbored contempt for Han Xin in his heart, it would not have clouded the tactical judgment of such a battle-hardened veteran. A detailed grasp of the battlefield's geography is, after all, the basic requirement of a general. On that day, the reconnaissance report Long Zhu received was clear. It was the dry winter season. The Wei River was slow-moving, shallow, and could be crossed on foot. This was a piece of critical intelligence. It meant that the Wei River, lying between the two forces due to its low winter water levels, did not form an effective barrier to military maneuvers. The second critical piece of intelligence concerned the enemy's numbers and composition. On the winter plains, deployment offered little secrecy. Fighting in the heartland of Shandong, full of farmland, meant there were no hills or forests to conceal ambushes. Nevertheless, Long Zhu dispatched wave after wave of Yue cavalry scouts from every direction. The intelligence was finally collated. Han Xin's army totaled around 100,000 men. Of these, at most 50,000 were Han infantry. The majority were Zhao soldiers and recently absorbed Qi troops. Crucially, a large number of Langzhong cavalry had also arrived on the battlefield. These were opponents Long Zhu knew well. However, a massive concentration like this, a direct frontal clash on a wide open field, was a first for both the Langzhong cavalry and the Lufan cavalry. Indeed, it was likely the first recorded large-scale heavy cavalry engagement in Chinese military history. Having assessed the terrain and the enemy's composition, Long Zhu's deployment was likely the textbook answer of that era. A line of long spear phalanxes formed the core, protected at the front and flanks by a skirmish line of shield-bearing shock troops. War chariots waited behind the line, ready to charge through the center or flank the enemy. The only variable was the nearly 10,000 Lufan cavalry. This was a decisive striking force unseen in the wars of the past few centuries. Although they also waited in the rear, when and how they would be deployed would be the decisive factor in the battle's outcome. On the western bank, the deployment of Han Xin's army would not have been significantly different. Long spear lines, shield-bearing skirmishers, and chariots deployed on the wings. Similarly, the Langzhong cavalry would not be lined up on the front. but positioned to allow sufficient room for combat maneuvers. With over 200,000 men combined, the battlefield deployment was undoubtedly a massive, multi-layered, multi-nodal plan. Both sides centered their formations around this wide river channel, clearing enough depth for the battlefield and then spreading out towards the flanks. The deployment was complete. Now it was a question of who would strike first. However, unexpectedly, the war drums of the Han army thundered. It was Han Xin who made the first move. Seeing the Han vanguard infantry begin to move toward the river flats, Long Zhu was at first surprised, then a cold sneer rose on his face. Both he and Han Xin had coincidentally chosen this stretch of riverbed as the engagement point, primarily because the wide, shallow channel was best for wading. But this did not mean the riverbed could be ignored. After all, chariots could hardly traverse the wet sand, and heavy infantry wielding long spears would inevitably suffer a loss in speed and formation cohesion when crossing the shallows. While this bit of water might not decide the battle on its own, is not victory on the battlefield accumulated from just such tiny advantages? Long Zhu scrutinized the Han army's crossing maneuver. There was nothing unusual. Skirmishers pushed forward to seize the crossing, forming a defensive shield wall on the bank. The subsequent infantry phalanxes did not switch columns, but crossed the river flats directly in a spread-out battle line. While this approach improved reaction speed and reduced vulnerability to concentrated ranged fire, the uneven terrain inevitably caused irregularities in the speed of the line. Long Zhu took all of this in and made his corresponding deployment. The Chu vanguard and a portion of the Qi army also moved forward, arraying themselves at a distance from the riverbank. Long Zhu did not choose to attack the enemy while they were half across the river. This was firstly because both sides were still in the probing phase and Han Xin had not committed a large force, and secondly because the shallow shoals did not present the necessary topographical entrapment to make such a tactic effective. After the Han vanguard crossed the Wei River, they underwent a rapid reorganization and immediately began their advance. First, the skirmish lines made contact, then retreated. Next, the infantry lines clashed and began to exchange blows. During this process, subsequent Han forces continued to cross the Wei River, pouring into the battle line, either spreading to the flanks to increase width or waiting in the center to reinforce depth. After the battle had continued for some time, Long Zhu observed a new movement from Han Xin on the opposite bank. First, the Zhao and Qi troops began to mobilize. This was entirely within Long Zhu's expectations. In terms of equipment, combat training, and will to fight, the surrendered troops of these two states were certainly far inferior to the elite core of the Han army. This was why the first wave Han Xin sent to force the crossing had to be Han troops. Just like the Chu army's own Qi allies, these surrendered troops might be used to fill the line or be sacrificed, but they could never be the spearhead. Second, the Han chariots began to move. They approached the river edge. Soldiers used timber to fill in the mud and potholes on the relatively solid sections of the riverbed. The Han chariots began a slow but continuous crossing, assembling behind the Han infantry line. Long Zhu suddenly grew excited. The movement of the chariots meant Han Xin was about to launch a massive assault, attempting to break the equilibrium on the battlefield. It meant the probing phase was ending. The moment for an all-out offensive to decide the victor was at hand. Long Zhu issued an order. The Chu infantry line was to fight and retreat, ceding a broader battlefield on the riverbank. The Chu army was not being defeated. Long Zhu was clearing more operational space for himself. He was clearing charging room for his Lufan cavalry. As the Chu infantry executed their fighting retreat, the battle line on the eastern bank of the Wei River began to stretch. The contact zone widened, drawing more and more soldiers into the grinding melee at the same time. Long Zhu stood on the high platform of his command chariot, watching intently. His eyes were fixed on the progress and deployment of the Zhao and Qi troops. Meanwhile, the Chu heavy cavalry and the chariot corps had already moved to the flanks, and the reserve infantry had moved into attack positions. Long Zhu was still waiting, still observing. As time passed, the battle line once again ground to a stalemate. On the eastern bank, the line of engagement was no longer a neat, straight cross-section. Shaped by the terrain, the differences between units, and the ebb and flow of combat, it had morphed into a jagged, interlocking mess. This contact line was long and chaotic, but it had ends. And waiting at those ends were the Chu cavalry and chariots poised to strike. Long Zhu saw it clearly. About half of Han Xin's forces had now crossed the river and committed to the fight, including almost all of the Han infantry. But their numbers were insufficient to hold the entire line, so they were plugged with Zhao troops, Qi troops, even Wei and Dai troops. Long Zhu saw it clearly. Although Han Xin's cavalry remained on the west bank, a significant number of his chariots had crossed to the east. But faced with the dense formations of both sides, these chariots lacked the space to charge and could only wait behind the infantry lines. Long Zhu saw it clearly. Because of the Wei River, Han Xin's army was now stuck in an awkward, hourglass-shaped formation across the two banks. To the east was the scorching infantry contact line. To the west were the reserves piled up on the bank waiting to cross. And in the middle, squeezed into the riverbed, was a chaotic mass of troops, mostly Zhao and Qi soldiers, far lacking the discipline and morale of the Han troops who had crossed in neat lines at the start of the battle. Now! Long Zhu could almost hear his own heartbeat. He held his breath and waved his arm violently. Cavalry, charge! In the Chu positions, signal flags waved frantically, relaying the order down the line to the flanks. The Chu heavy cavalry, having waited impatiently for this moment, launched their attack. They cut in from both sides of the battlefield like a white hurricane, unstoppable. They quickly split into small groups, hammering the flanks of every protruding section of the Han line, or charging straight into the weak points near the riverbank. The balance of the battle shifted instantly. Although the Han troops fought desperately, the auxiliary forces filling the gaps had no such will to fight. They had never even seen a heavy cavalry charge before. In the chaos, the line was breached at multiple points. The once solid front shattered. Immediately following, the Chu chariots unleashed their fury. These war machines, pulled by 4 armored horses, thundered across the flat riverbank, unstoppable. They smashed through the gaps in the line, crushing into the rear and flanks of the infantry. With their sheer momentum, the soldiers' halberds, and the bladed hubs on their wheels, they tore the infantry formations apart. Nothing could stand in their way. The Zhao and Qi troops were the first to break. They dropped their flags and spears and fled backward. Fortunately, the Wei River was shallow, and they scrambled back across in a panic. Soon the Han troops, having lost their flank protection, could hold no longer. From the Han center on the west bank, the gongs and bells of retreat rang out. The Han army began to withdraw. Though they tried to maintain formation, defeat was inevitable. Long Zhu saw it all clearly. His blood was boiling. He descended from his command chariot, donned his helmet, and mounted an armored war horse, taking a long halberd from a Lufan cavalryman. He ordered Xiang Ta and the king of Qi, "I will lead the cavalry and chariots in pursuit. You command the infantry to follow immediately. Today, we wipe out the Han army." Long Zhu believed victory was certain. The Zhao and Qi troops had routed. The Han army was being pushed back across the river. The eastern bank was littered with Han corpses and destroyed chariots. The blood-crazed Lufan cavalry were already wading across in pursuit. Many Chu soldiers had, in fact, already set foot on the western bank. The Han rout showed no sign of stopping. Panic was spreading even to the troops who had not yet crossed, who were now turning to flee. So, Long Zhu did not hesitate. Armored and mounted, he led the charge, splashing across the Wei River to hunt down and intercept the fleeing Han army. However, a detail escaped his notice. Far back on the western bank, Han Xin's central command formation had never moved. No matter how the battle shifted, they stood there, nailed like a spike, constantly signaling with flags. The 27-year-old Han Xin, though trained in martial arts and always carrying a sword, never fetishized personal combat like Xiang Yu or Long Zhu. Years ago in Huayin, When thugs mocked him and forced him to crawl between their legs, the tall, armed Han Xin had endured it. He understood that brute force was not the ultimate power. Endurance and wise decision-making were the only true paths to victory. At this moment, Han Xin stood on his high command platform, coldly observing the movements of the Lufan cavalry. When he saw the Chu cavalry and chariots begin their chaotic pursuit across the river, he gave the order. The signalman behind him flagged a command to the rear of the Han army, not the front. No one knew what the order was, or where it would go. Then, Han Xin issued another command. The Langzhong cavalry, who had been gathered around him for hours, began to move. They started to maneuver to the flanks, and even the rear of the Han central formation. To Longzhu, this could only mean one thing. Either Han Xin was fleeing amidst these horsemen, or the Han cavalry dared not face the Lufan riders head-on and had chosen to scatter. Longzhu was ecstatic. Glory was within his grasp. For saving the state of Qi, surely claiming half its land would not be excessive. What title would Xiang Yu grant him? King of Jibei, King of Jinan, or King of Jiaodong? But then, something happened on the battlefield that stunned Longzhu. The Zhao and Qi soldiers who had not crossed the river were retreating with the routed vanguard. But when they reached Han Xin's central formation, they stopped. They rapidly reformed, creating a thin but solid line of spears. Some Lufan cavalry and chariots that had charged too far forward crashed against this line like waves against a rock and were shattered. These troops displayed tactical discipline and combat skills far superior to typical Zhao or Qi soldiers. They were Han Xin's hidden ballast, elite Guanzhong infantry disguised in the uniforms of Zhao and Qi. And their commander was the battle-hardened Han general, the man with over 70 scars on his body. Cao Can. Cao Can reined his horse before the line, commanding these disguised elites to hold their ground. Behind them, the routed Zhao, Qi, and Han soldiers found the time and space to rally and reorganize. Faced with a forest of spears and a wall of resolve, even the chariots and Lufan cavalry hesitated. They abandoned their direct charge and idled on the battlefield, waiting for their main infantry force to catch up. And then, at this critical juncture, a low roar came from the southern end of the battlefield, from the upper reaches of the Wei River. It sounded like the first thunder of spring, dense, deep, and intense. Longzhu wiped the blood and sweat from his forehead and looked up. His heart instantly snapped. Down the Wei River, a wall of water, not high but spanning the entire river, roared downstream with a deafening crash. Its muddy body churned with white foam, pushing dead wood, weapons, and even corpses before it, rushing down with a slow but unstoppable momentum. This was Han Xin's trap. He had secretly dammed the upper reaches of the Wei River with sandbags. The river's wide, shallow, and slow-moving nature meant that low dams could be built quickly with just sandbags to raise the water level, and the low height of the dams allowed excess water to spill over, preventing the river from drying up completely and alerting the Chu army. At the decisive moment of the battle, Han Xin ordered the dams broken. The accumulated floodwaters were unleashed. The volume of water wasn't exaggerated. It wouldn't instantly wash away armored soldiers. But its psychological impact was devastating. Soldiers who couldn't swim panicked and sank. Cavalry and chariots loitering in the riverbed were swept away. More importantly, it instantly filled the exposed riverbed. The sandbars were gone. The reeds were gone. There was only turbid yellow water, depth unknown. Soldiers in the riverbed threw away their weapons in terror and scrambled for the banks. Soldiers on the banks dared not step into the water. No one knew how much more water was coming. No one knew if a single step would lead to a watery grave. The Wei River transformed from a harmless shoal into an impassable natural barrier. The Chu cavalry and vanguard, who had already crossed to the west bank, were now cut off and surrounded. The follow-up troops on the east bank dared not advance. The Han war drums thundered, the horns blew. Cao Can waved his sword, and all the Han soldiers raised their spears in unison, advancing with disciplined steps. Hoofbeats shook the sky, and war cries rose from all sides. The Langzhong cavalry, who had scattered moments ago, wheeled around. They began their charge, brandishing long halberds, ignoring the scattered Chu infantry and heading straight for the panicked Lufan cavalry. Heavy cavalry battles are often decided in a single moment of impact. The Langzhong cavalry, fresh and ready, smashed into the Lufan cavalry, who were exhausted and in disarray after half a day of fighting. The victor was decided instantly. Guan Ying, leading the most elite riders, pierced straight into the center of the battlefield like a red lightning bolt, cleaving through all resistance. Long Zhu screamed in his heart, "No!" Then he was struck by a charging Langzhong cavalryman and fell from his horse, dead. His vice-general Zhou Lan, who had crossed with him, was captured. Lieutenants, marshals, Lufan commanders, they were either cut down or surrendered. The Chu forces on the west bank were annihilated. At this moment, there were still at least 100,000 Chu infantry on the east bank of the Wei River. But separated by the flood, they could do nothing but watch helplessly as their elite cavalry and chariots were wiped out by Han Xin. The king of Qi, whose will to fight was weak to begin with, chose to flee once again, taking the remnants of his army and deserting the battlefield immediately. And the nominal Chu commander, Xiang Yu's nephew, Xiang Ta, seeing Long Zhu dead, could only choose to retreat. The retreat quickly turned into a rout, and the rout into a total collapse. After destroying the Chu forces on the west bank, the water level of the Wei River returned to normal. Gao Kun and Guan Ying immediately led their troops across the river in hot pursuit. Not far away at Chenyang, they captured the fleeing king of Qi and a host of his generals and ministers. Then they split up to sweep the region. In a very short time, before Qi could organize any further resistance, they crushed all opposition. In this campaign, the Langzhong cavalry led by Guan Ying played a decisive role. With mobility and impact far beyond the enemy's comprehension, they wrote the opening chapter of the legend of Han Cavalry, a legend that would continue for centuries. By December of 204 BC, the state of Qi, which originally boasted an army of nearly 300,000, had been reduced to ashes. The 200,000-strong Chu rescue army had also been obliterated. Only the famous lucky general Xiang Ta escaped death once again, fleeing back to Chu. The entire north of China had now fallen into Han Xin's hands, and that included Mount Tai. There is an old Chinese saying, "Tai Shan Ya Ding, Mount Tai pressing down." This was likely Xiang Yu's situation. The only thing he needed to ponder was, will Mount Tai crush him? And when?